Now, today marks the first anniversary of the start of Sudan's civil war, which has killed thousands and triggered the world's largest crisis of displaced people. An international donors conference is being held in Paris, with the United Nations appealing for billions of euros in aid. The UN says around 18 million people, that's a third of Sudan's population, need food assistance to survive. French President Emmanuel Macron says more than 2 billion euros have been pledged, nearly half from EU countries. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the war between rival factions is being waged on the Sudanese people. We'll take a look at how the conflict began.
Fighting erupts in Sudan's capital in April 2023. A power struggle between two rival generals spills out onto the streets of Khartoum when a deal on transitioning to civilian rule falls apart. At the center of the conflict are Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the effective ruler of Sudan, and Mohamed Hamdan, the head of a rival paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces. In 2021, they had formed an alliance, staging a coup as Sudan was trying to transition to a civilian-led democracy after decades of dictatorship. But the generals then turn on each other as they fight over integrating the paramilitary into the regular army. The Rapid Support Forces take control of Khartoum Airport and the presidential palace. A year on, they control much of the capital. Millions of people are internally displaced. Others have fled Sudan. The fighting has damaged key infrastructure. Food and medicines are in short supply. People are living in squalor, and aid organizations are ringing the alarm.
Time is running out. Without a stop to the fighting and unhindered access for the delivery of humanitarian aid, Sudan's crisis will dramatically worsen in the months to come and could impact the whole region. We are only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and the situation could be much more dire in reality.
Despite international calls for a ceasefire, a deal between the warring generals seems out of reach as the conflict enters its second year.
Hamid Khala-fallah is a Sudan policy analyst with the University of Manchester. He joins us from Nairobi. Welcome to DW. Let me start with perhaps a naive question. Sudan, a very poor country. What does one side or the other win if they win?
Thank you for having me. So there's a lot to win. There's basically power over Sudan. Governing Sudan means access to Sudan's gold, which has been getting shipped to the Emirates, to Russia, fueling the war in Ukraine, and so on. So gold and other minerals, agricultural lands, so many other resources. Having control over Sudan gives the warring generals this access to the resources and to the ability to make very, terrible deals for the Sudanese people with governments across the world that are willing to kind of work with militias, to work with the militaries and so on, to get resources at cheap prices.
Right. And it's interesting that you seem to be saying that these exports are continuing to the outside world even as the country is at war with itself.
That is correct. These shipments are still taking place. Gold is being exported illegally, obviously, to the Emirates, to Russia, to other countries. And also, on the other side, arms have continued to come in and fly into the country, particularly through Eastern Chad, on the borders with Darfur, where the Emirates is sending arms to the Rapid Support Forces, as well as other governments like Turkey and Egypt and so on, sending arms also to the military.
OK, so you've outlined the why and the fact that across the region there are other powers meddling in this. So what can be done then to get all these fingers out of this pot?
I think, 1 year now, the world has done close to nothing to solve the issue in Sudan. There was initially a strong response and so on, and very quickly Sudan kind of disappeared from policy discussions, from global policy discussions, and no one pays enough attention at the moment. There's a lot that the world can do to exert pressure on the warring factions, the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces internally, but also externally. For instance, the Emirates is an active part of this war. There's been no pressure exerted on the Emirates, as well as other countries that are supporting the warring factions. So what the world could start by doing is exert serious pressures on these actors, regional and global actors supporting the war in Sudan, and to show the warring factions that there would be very serious consequences for them continuing the war. At the moment, there is no incentives for them to end the war.
We can now welcome Kelly Clements. She's the Deputy High Commissioner of the UN's Refugee Agency, UNHCR. She joins us from Geneva. Kelly, good to have you on the show. You just got back from South Sudan. That's the country that has received the largest number of Sudanese refugees. What did you experience there?
The situation really is quite dramatic. I mean, we're a year in, but overall, 8.6 million people uprooted from their homes. Most of them internally displaced, but there is an important number of refugees and returnees in some cases. And South Sudan is one of those areas that actually has received over 500,000 South Sudanese returnees because of the war that started a year ago in Sudan. These are people that have not necessarily lived in South Sudan any time in recent history. They're needing to rebuild. They're trying to find their footing again. They're fleeing, of course, very difficult circumstances inside Sudan. And then add to that hundreds of thousands of refugees. And this is obviously the world's youngest country, 11 million people, was already hosting about 310,000 refugees before the war broke out. And add to that, of course, another couple of hundred Sudanese refugees. And they continue to arrive. We were in Rank a couple of days ago, which is right on the border with Sudan, and we still see about 1,800 people a day crossing the border. They're lacking everything. It's food, it's water, it's a place to shelter themselves. There's an enormous logistical operation that we've launched with the interagency in terms of trying to move people out of that congested area and try to allow them then some place to reestablish themselves safely. The needs are quite dramatic. The stories that they're telling of trauma, of gender-based violence, because of course the majority of those that are crossing are families, are women and children. And so the relief community is really trying to step up with very meager resources in order to support a really horrific situation.
The war in Sudan is often called the forgotten war. How dangerous is it for the people of Sudan that the international community seems to prioritize other conflicts?
Well, indeed, it is a forgotten crisis. It is one year in with millions and millions of people that have been uprooted and really need everything. We have launched, as the top of the program you mentioned, an appeal between the activities inside Sudan and then, of course, the neighboring countries for the refugee and the returnee response, a little over $4 billion. The requirements are only 6% to 7% met, and we're already in the middle of April. And this means, of course, that we are not able to provide the kind of life-saving support that's necessary. We are not able then to have children back in school inside Sudan. That means 19 million children in need of some kind of education. That means 1 million refugees in neighboring countries that we're trying very much to support host communities to be able to integrate those refugees into their services. But these are very poor countries whose citizens as well have basic needs for aid and assistance. We need much more attention to the humanitarian requirements that are necessary. And we also need to step up the support through international financial institutions and others to try to deal with very basic but important economic impacts, security impacts, and development needs that have gone unmet. So the needs are vast.
At today's donor conference, Sudan is finally top of the agenda. What results are you hoping for there?
Well, we're hoping first, obviously, for a lot more attention to this crisis, a cessation to the hostilities, peace, some ability for Sudan to come back together, and these communities that have been wrought with conflict and war, for there to be some reconciliation. But until then, we need the humanitarian aid not just to continue to, but to ramp up significantly. We're not even meeting basic assistance. Now, we do hear about support that is coming from the international community. It's a little early. I think the conference is still underway, but we would need much more support to be able to meet those $4 billion in requirements and to be able to assist those host countries that have already managed a huge humanitarian responsibility on behalf of the international community, but also to go much further.
Yeah, this donor conference, by definition, is mostly focused on raising money, but also on finding paths to peace. How important is it to empower civil society to fight for democracy in a setting like the one we're encountering in Sudan?
Oh, it's hugely important. You must have civil society at the table. You must have women-led organizations and refugees, returnees, the people of Sudan very much a part of that conversation. And this is something, of course, that we have promoted in terms of the support that we're providing, particularly in those neighboring countries. There's a strong grassroots support in terms of being able to provide for their own citizens, and to try to reestablish some of those services that become tremendously important in order to look forward to the day that hopefully they can return voluntarily, safely and in dignity. And without that civil society voice, of course, it's very difficult for peace to prevail.
That was UNHCR Deputy High Commissioner Kelly Clements. Thank you so much for your time and joining DW today.
Thank you.